I was doing a routine checkup on a 17-year-old soccer player, and she told me that she doesn't eat breakfast because her dad threw out her cereal since it had too much sugar. Now, honestly, stories like this are not rare. Parents are trying to do the right thing, but they're applying adult food rules to teenage athletes who have completely different needs. Welcome back to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Colleen Sloan. I'm a PA and dietitian, and in case you didn't know, teen athletes are not just small adults. And sports nutrition is wildly different than general adult nutrition. Teens need more carbs, not less. We prioritize fluids. And protein, although it's all the rage in adult nutrition right now, it's important for teen athletes, but it's really not the star of the show. So in today's episode, we're unpacking what matters when it comes to fueling young athletes. And I am super excited to welcome to the podcast a college friend of mine, Maria Vallasciani. She's a registered dietitian, sports nutrition expert, and former D1 athlete. So she brings both elite level training and real-world clinical experience to this conversation. And I ask her questions that I'm getting in clinic every day. Things like the subtle red flags that a teen isn't eating enough, what a pre and post-workout fueling actually looks like for a kid with school, practice, and a jam-packed schedule, and the truth about sports drinks, hydration, and who needs an electrolyte supplement. And I promise you're going to want to stick around to the end because Maria shares 3 questions she asks every single athlete. And they are simple, practical, and honestly kind of brilliant. And before we get into the episode, I've also created a companion guide to this episode. It's 6 essential sports nutrition and supplement tips. It's a simple 1-page guide on macronutrients, creatine, and electrolytes. You can grab it for free at examroomnutrition.com/numbers or just go down to the show notes because I will link down to it below. All right, so get comfy or drive safe and enjoy my conversation with Maria. So Maria, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. This is so cool to connect after 15, 16 years of being an undergraduate school together to our journey to becoming dietitians. I'm really excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Colin. It was great to see, everything you have been doing with nutrition, taking it to the next level, moving into the PA field. So I'm excited to be here.
Off air, we were talking about the multiple hats you wear. I'm so impressed by you, but one of your passions is sports nutrition and working with young athletes. And let's start out with a few of the red flags that might suggest that a young athlete is not eating enough to support all of the things of being a young athlete, their growth, their development, and their sport performance. What are some of those red flags that you look for?
Well, it's interesting because young athletes, they somehow can compensate still for the lack of nutrition at some point because they have such high energy levels, right? So when parents come to me with the kids, they usually just come to make sure they are eating enough. But they're not coming because they have an issue unless it's a very, high, red flag that they are seeing. The main issue that I see is poor growth. So when a kid is not growing properly and we use the growth charts to assess that, then that probably relates to poor nutrition or excessive exercise or a combination of both. Now, if they're not eating enough, I tend to see issues with sleeping, gastrointestinal issues, and then a lot of binge eating at some point, under eating at another point, and poor performance not only in sports. We start seeing poor performance in school as well.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite questions to really tease out if they are, in fact, eating enough? Because I hear this a lot from parents too. They're like, tell him he needs to eat more. And so what are some of your favorite ways to really determine, are they eating enough or not?
So number 1, we do a 2-3 day food recall in office, and they do get a form where they can actually do it before. And I tell parents, take some pictures of the meals, right? Because the concept of eating enough is different for everybody and more for those people that don't really know. So they bring some pictures of their meals, and then we go through the entire schedule. So we start by going through meals that they have at home, and then what happened at school. Because sadly at school, parents have no control. And, kids recalling sometimes might not be so accurate. So we go through school's menu options, and then having these pictures also helps a lot to see, how much they are eating. And then they also bring to the office records of the pediatrician from like previous visits to assess growth. So I not only have my starting point, but I know where they are coming from.
I love the concept of using pictures. I actually use this a lot with like my medical diagnoses with like rashes or even like poop. So I really like when patients bring in pictures of stuff because sometimes it's hard for them to describe the thing, but if I can see it, it's really helpful. So that's a really helpful tip is to have them just take a picture of what they're eating. And you're right, people's recall is pretty inaccurate and kids probably even worse. They barely remember like what they did in school this morning, let alone like what they ate for the last 3 days.
And another issue that we sometimes have is that parents who report come from the adult concept, right? And they translate that into the kid and they are like, oh, but she eats a lot of carbs. And they are probably eating like half a cup because for an adult, maybe that's enough, an inactive adult. And mainly when we're talking weight management. But then when we translate that to the kid, it might be too little. But, if a parent doesn't know, then again, you might think this kid is eating enough, but in reality, they aren't.
That's a really good point, too. And it actually leads me nicely into my next question. And I want to talk about protein because in the adult world, protein is king right now. It's everywhere. Everyone thinks they need to get more protein. And so I would love, from a sports dietitian's perspective, how much protein do teen athletes actually need? And just unpack, the concept of the importance of protein in teens.
Protein, usually we calculate that in grams per kilogram, right? If you think about a kid, then unless they are like an adult size already, they are usually lighter. So they might be like 40, 45 kilos. So their protein needs, if we go to like a 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram that an active athlete might need, they tend to be lower. So it's very easy for them to meet. If they're like younger, if they're like 9 or 10 years old, probably like 8 ounces of milk will meet their protein needs. So we don't really need to go for all these like super fortified high protein foods, 40 grams of protein shake. Like they just meet that with regular food. And the foundation of their nutrition and to meet their energy demands would come from carbohydrates. And I think that parents had to understand that even in the setting of a good amount of protein, if there is a caloric deficit or carbohydrate deficit, that protein goes to energy. So they're not even going to be using that protein appropriately. I think that we are in the era of protein because of all the weight management approaches that are out there. So we need to emphasize that at least 50, 55, 60% of those calories need to come from carbohydrates.
Yeah, I really like how you switch the focus of the conversation, answer their question about protein, but really it's really easy for a kid to meet their protein needs. They need to be focusing on carbohydrates. And I love how you bring that conversation back to what is really important for teen athletes. So since carbohydrates are super, super important, I would love if you could walk us through like what does a good pre-workout and post-workout fueling look like for kids in real life?
Okay. So usually in sports nutrition, when we are working about like pre and post workouts, we want to relate that to the type of sport, right? So for my kids who are more in endurance sports, intermittent sports, like team sports, usually pre-workout, we work more with the carbohydrates and fats and fruits to give them a quick source of energy they can digest and use. And if we are working with more like strength athletes, because I do have a lot of like power lifters in my practice or like CrossFitter, even if they're young, they are practicing these sports, we focus a little more in give them a stimulus, like a protein stimulus and a carbohydrate or a fruit. How much they eat prior, that would depend on how much time they have. Usually these kids are training, it could be at 4 p.m., it could be at 6 p.m., it could be at 7 p.m. So having dinner or a snack before training becomes a challenge. Usually, if I have like a runner, cross country, track and field, I would tell them, okay, maybe toast with a little of peanut butter jelly and a banana. If I have a power lifter, we work more with like a protein yogurt and fruit. The recovery comes very similar to, despite the sport that we're working with. So we always focus on protein to repair muscle and on carbohydrates to replete glycogen stores. And the number one emphasis is like, it's not all protein. It's usually more toward the higher carbohydrate intake and not so much about the protein only.
Nutrient timing comes up a lot in adult sports nutrition. I'm curious, is it equally as important for teens to get that timing right when it comes to protein and carbs?
So, yes. I had a lot of kids that still experience gastrointestinal issues if nutrition is not done properly. A little bit more challenges with the schedules, but usually if they have 3 hours or more, they can have a full meal. They should have enough time to digest. Depending on the sport, sometimes we still decrease the amount of fiber to make sure, they don't have issues during the training session. anything that gets between the 1 hour to practice, it has to be an easy to digest source. So a granola bar, a fruit, maybe we add some like peanut butter if they have strong stomachs. If not, we go more toward like the honey, jelly, easy to digest. And the recovery, I know there has been a lot of like, back and forwards with how much protein, when to take it and everything. But I do emphasize try to have something snack within 45 minutes and a meal within 2 to 4 hours. And it has been working well for us. Now, I do have the case where kids, swimmers, for example, they swim very early in the morning, sometimes like 6, 7 a.m. before going to school. Those kids have a very hard time waking up and having a snack or even breakfast before practicing. So we load them at night. So that night meal sometimes is a very high carbohydrate meal. And then they have a small snack in the morning so they can actually at least get something, then go to practice. So it all depends on the sport and the timing, but we do have different strategies that we work.
Yeah, I love the science behind carbohydrate loading. It's really, really fascinating. Now, I want to talk to you about hydration because this is another area that there's a lot of confusion. And I specifically want to get your perspective on if you think sports drinks are necessary for teen athletes. And if so, when would you utilize them?
Okay, so when it comes to hydration for athletes, I think it all depends, right? Everything is relative in nutrition. We have learned that, and everything depends on the person. But kids do not sweat as much as adults, and they do not lose as much sodium as adults do. These days, there is a lot of, or a huge dilemma between do we really need that much sodium to stay hydrated and how to time it. With kids that live in Miami, well, Miami is very hot. So I think that they need a little more hydration than a regular kid that's training in the 70 degrees. So we do use electrolytes. I don't know if sports drinks would be what we use because there's a huge range of sports drinks and some of them bring nothing, although they are very popular among kids. But we do either a dilution of an electrolyte or a pediatric version of an electrolyte, or we teach them how to do isotonic beverages at home that are super easy. Water or sparkling water, some juice, a little bit of salt, and then they can use that, and it's usually a little more natural.
In those sports drinks that you suggest, do you also include a carbohydrate source? Like, are you looking for one that has, sugars in it, or is it specifically just electrolytes?
There's people are not used to, or kids are not used to consuming nutrition during training sessions. So I use some of these new powders that have some carbohydrates because that's also going to promote the absorption of sodium, keep them hydrated, and give them energy because they do train a lot. And some of them, cross country or track and field runners go to school, train, and then go to an academy or a private coach and train. Volleyball players, they do the same. So they're doing back to back 3 hours of training without nutrition, like nothing. And the ones that have issue tolerating solids, then we can use a liquid, hydration solution that will keep them energy levels up and also hydrated. It's a little bit tricky. I think it depends on each situation, but definitely we want to make sure, they get enough fluid and they can actually retain that fluid.
I like how you said it. Nutrition is all relative because it's very true. What works for one kiddo might not work for them and is very sport specific. So it does depend on the activity that they're doing. So I would like to linger here on the concept of hydration a little bit. What are some signs that that athlete might be underhydrated, even if they don't complain of thirst?
So cold hands, they might get dizzy. They might start to lose coordination. They might have dry membranes, so like dry mouth. I have seen a lot of my kids who don't complain and they faint one of the time. And then significant weight loss pre and post. That's a sign that we see, when they are maybe not on course, lack of urine output or a very concentrated urine or very diluted urine, depending on what we are missing. If you are missing more electrolytes, if you are missing more like free water. What I teach kids is like, if you're going to practice and you see your urine is too dark and it smells, then you need to drink more water. Since I believe sodium is not the main driven here, I just teach them fluid.
Yeah, I agree. And I teach kids to look at the color of their pee all the time. And they kind of look at me like, ew, that's gross. And I'm like, no, it gives you such useful data and information. So the concept of hydration can be a little bit challenging. So I actually have an entire podcast episode dedicated to it that I've done in the past. So after this episode, guys, go check out episode number 71. It's titled Sports Nutrition Hot Topics, Sugar, Sports Drinks, and Fueling for Performance. It would be a great episode to listen to after this one if you want to take a deeper dive into sports drinks in general. But Maria, let's talk supplements. I am in a bunch of Facebook groups, and the question of creatine for adolescents comes up almost every day. So, what does the science say about the safety of creatine in teen athletes?
The science doesn't say. There's not enough, research out there in young athletes to say nothing. I'm going to tell you what I do. That's what I have, put together after reading the science in adults and doing a lot like pediatric and seeing side effects. I think that there are certain athletes and a level of sports that will require extras in certain sports. For those kids where creatine might make a difference and they are high elite athletes and their competition is going to be using it, I use it. In those kids that might be plant-based or have a lot of like a very restrictive eating pattern that, we see them, I use it. And I dose it per kilogram in these kids because they tend to be smaller. Now, in a recreational young athlete who, is not really involved that much in sports, eat a variety of foods, eat animal protein, I don't think creatine needs to be introduced. And not because creatine might not be safe. It's because I think parents then try to grasp on whatever it's out there, social media or somebody's using or what they read. And I don't think they know why they are using it. And I try to drive the concept away from supplements into real food first so they can build a good base. And then, of course, if you are the number one in the United States, I don't know, in track, well, we might need some creatine, or a power lift, we might need some creatine. But if you're going, to play volleyball twice a week for an hour, then you don't need creatine. You need to eat a proper diet.
Yes, food first. I love that all of my guests and all of the dietitians really promote that because that is what's going to help you be a really successful athlete. Now, you had mentioned that parents love to kind of grab things and they will do anything to help their athlete thrive. So, I would love from your perspective, what supplements have you seen be overused, unnecessary, or are potentially risky in this population?
I have a bunch of kids doing pre-workout supplements with much more caffeine than needed or even allowed if they're playing college, for example. Not too many supplements that would cause damage per se, but that are misused and can cause like gastrointestinal issues. So like I had a kid using a lot of like beta-alanine and having that tingling, and another kid trying sodium bicarb and they were having GI issues. But not per se, I would say the most abused supplement, if we can call it like that, would be a protein powder and a pre-workout. Those are the two that present the most. In terms of any supplement when it comes to pediatrics, if I don't see a deficit, I don't use it. I don't use multivitamins because you need. I don't use iron because of. I don't use vitamin D because of. Vitamin D would be the only one that personally as a professional I would prescribe prophylactically because I know most people are deficient. But if I see that there are signs and symptoms of a deficit, I would check blood work prior to giving a supplement. If I find a deficit, then we supplement and then optimize nutrition. But usually, again, we try to stay away. The supplements that we do use are like, intra-fueling. So I introduce them to energy gels, to waffles, to gummies.
Yeah, and I think that's best practice. I don't think we should just be blanket suggesting every patient take a vitamin D and multivitamin and all these extra things if their blood work doesn't prove that they need it, that they have a deficiency. So I love your perspective on that. Now, what about for the teen athlete who is trying to gain muscle? What guidance would you suggest clinicians give before they tell them, oh, just take a protein powder or other performance supplements? How can we help these teens who are either trying to gain muscle or just gain weight?
Yeah. And I want to just put something aside with these questions, right? Because we talk about teens, but there are like a lot of kids that are not teens yet, and parents come and want to do body composition, right? So when we are in practice, we always do what's called a growth assessment, and we try to identify their, peak velocity to see if they actually went through maturation and to see if gaining muscle is even feasible. Because when there are no hormones in, they haven't gone through puberty, it doesn't matter what we do. They don't have testosterone. There is no estrogen. There is no progesterone. So we are just doing nothing. If they want to teach these kids technique prior to that, that's okay. Then they will have the technique. But calling it let's gain muscle, that's going to be a little bit challenging. There are no building blocks. Now, if they have gone through puberty and they have the hormones in, number one, enough calories. Number two, enough carbohydrates. Then we can optimize with protein. If there is a need, we can use creatine. And then they need a stimulus. So if they're not lifting weights, then muscle is not going to come in. It's not just, the nutrition and the excessive protein. So I think it's a whole education that we had to give to parents, to kids, because if they're teens, my 16, 17, they make decisions. They are not just coming to do what mom and dad said. And then coaches, right? I work a lot with football. So coaches send me kids and said, he needs to gain 30 pounds in 2 months. I'm like, well, that's not healthy and that's not going to happen. And it won't be muscle if we make it happen. So we need to be realistic. And the method that I use to measure body composition, it's called ISAC and it's anthropometric, so skin for circumferences. And one of the measurements we take is how wide their hips are, because that's a determinant for me to know how much muscle they can put in. So I give them a realistic goal, because if not, it's, they just want to gain muscle forever and ever, and I don't know how they're going to fit in their bodies.
Yeah, I love that approach. And that brings me to the next question, which is how do we approach these conversations around, body image, weight, especially performance, without causing harm? And this is, I think, important in athletes because whether they're underweight, overweight, normal body weight, a lot of them do want to change something about their bodies. And so how do you approach these conversations to not stigmatize them?
So I think that we always have to put these athletes in two separate categories. I work with very high performance young athletes. So there are some sports that we are going to need to deal with weight. Like if they're doing wrestling, powerlifting, some karate, we need to have these conversations because they are part of the sport. If I work a lot with the Miami Ballet City Center. So with these ballerinas, it is unrealistic for us not to think that the physical appearance will come into play because they have that pressure. So I think that there we had to know how to talk to them, be aware that this, body weight conversation is going to happen, and try to teach them that if we fix the nutrition, if we work on the nutrition for performance, and they follow that structure, they can achieve the body composition changes that they want. Now, with the other part of the population where weight is not a thing, I always try to tell parents, you don't put kids on a diet. You don't put kids to lose weight. We educate them, we give them the tools to make smart decisions, but we never put weight as the main factor because they are growing. So weight is not an indicator of nothing because we need to look at height, we need to look at muscle development, we need to look at how the bones are growing. So just focusing on the weight, it's a very blind concept. So I move them away from that number of the scale to other factors.
I really like how you don't shy away from having weight conversations when needed, because you're right. Some of these athletes do have to cut weight. They do have to make weight in order to compete. And some of these sports are very body conscious. And I like that you sort of point out the elephant in the room, for lack of better words. And I think that can be really helpful and freeing for the child too, to open up about how they're feeling about their body and about the sport that they've chosen.
They're gonna do it anyways. They're gonna try to make weight, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every part of that process, that just put that aside, and then they don't know how to do it. And also for the parents. So, and then you have to interact with the coaches again, because this is a triangle. It's not the athletes, not the parents, it's everybody involved in the care, because we want these kids to receive the same message from everybody. And even healthcare practitioners, right? Because doctors or whoever is taking care of the kid had to be able to give the same message. It's interesting because I work with a lot of type 1 diabetic athletes. And one of the issues I had at some point was endos saying no carbs. And then here I come saying carbs and give them insulin. I don't care, put that energy, that glucose into the cell, but do not cut the carbs on this kid because he's going to go and train anyways. So, we don't want him fainting because of lack of energy sources. So that's why I say everybody on the team has to be on the same page.
Yeah. And I really like your framework of starting with getting enough energy, enough calories, then focusing on carbohydrates, then protein, and then supplements if needed. I think that's a really easy concept for clinicians to kind of keep in mind and prioritize when they're having conversations with their clients. I think that simplifies it a lot. So I want to end our conversation with a few questions that you like to ask, or maybe that you wish clinicians would ask. So some of these high yield screening questions to ask teen athletes just about their nutrition in general. What are some of your favorite things to ask?
So I ask them, do you eat breakfast? That's number one, because that's the one I see that they don't do. Then I ask them about the routine at school. What do you have available? Do you bring your meals to school? Is there a cafeteria? What foods? And I educate on how to select, or, I recommend to bring their own meals. And then I ask them, what time do you train? How do you do your nutrition around training? Is it a late session? Are we having a pre-workout snack? Are you having dinner before? And I ask mom, how are you handling this, right? Because mom is probably driving from work to pick up the kid, to drop the kid, to go pick up the other kid. So how is nutrition fitting in your day-to-day life? Do we need to manage logistics? So all the three questions have covered the main issues kids have and help me give them some structure that works. Then from there, I have a particular way of practicing where I create a WhatsApp group and I put every caretaker and the kid in that group, and I leave that as an open communication tool. So if they need to ask questions, they feel supported, and they might not use it, but they might say, what about this granola bar? Or I compete tomorrow at 7. How, can I plan my nutrition? And that brings better results. It's a little bit more hard work on the end, but at the end, if they learn earlier, it's a win-win for everybody. So, more education, I would say, at the end of the day is what they need.
We have to talk about the first question that you ask, because I lit up when you said that you always ask about breakfast, because I do too. And I have to hear your perspective on this. When I ask if a teen eats breakfast, 85% of the time, the answer is no. And then I ask why, and they say one of two things: I don't feel hungry, or it makes me nauseous. So do you get those responses? And if you do, how do you respond to them? How do you help teens start eating breakfast?
So with the I don't feel hungry, I think it comes from the day before, because they train until very late. They don't eat in school. They don't eat a pre-workout snack. They overeat at night. So then they're not hungry in the morning. So the first thing I do is I fix the previous day so they can have breakfast. If I feel nauseous, I teach them, why you train your gut, saying that you do for sports, you do for breakfast. We start small, maybe with a smoothie, maybe with a bar, and then we build from there as the kids get used to. The other one I get is I don't have time. So I tell them, okay, well, phone down when you wake up, no social media, eat breakfast if you really want to be a good athlete, and then go and do social media in the car when you go to school. So those are the three, situations I found with breakfast. But usually the start simple and build up gives them confidence to say, I can do this. The parents get confidence, I can do this. And then it becomes more of a natural process.
Oh, I love your tough love of telling them to put the phones down, get off social media, because you're right. If they want to prioritize their performance, they have to prioritize their nutrition. And that comes from getting off social media and really focusing on their meals. So I really love that, Maria. This has been such a cool conversation. We could probably sit and chat for hours. You are a plethora of information. We barely scratched the surface. So if people want to connect with you online, where could they find more information about you or the services that you offer?
So we have a web that's called www.mbnutritionusa.com, where you guys are going to see our entire team and everything that we do. And then we have an office in Miami that's located in Coconut Grove. So we do both telehealth and we also see people in office. For pediatrics, I love in office because, you have to build rapport with teens. And that's face-to-face usually becomes a little bit easier. So, and then if they have any questions, my email is info@mbnutrition@gmail.com, so they can always reach out.
I will link to all of that down below in the show notes. So absolutely get connected with Maria. If you work with teen athletes, she's a wealth of information. You will learn so much from her. Maria, thank you so much for the gift of your time. It's been so fun seeing you after 16 years.
Thank you.
All right, guys, thanks for carving out some time for nutrition today. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next week.